Welcome back, Eigen family. Hey guys, make sure you like, share, comment, subscribe to the channel if you have not already. Check out the website, eigenbros.com. Eigenbros on Instagram, Eigenbros on what? Well, on Twitter.
TikTok, Twitter.
Eigenbros2 on TikTok.
Instagram.
Indeed. And then patrons, guys, thank you so much. Thank you as always. We greatly appreciate you guys supporting the channel. If you want to help support the channel as well, check out patreon.com/Eigenbros. And you know all the drills, so we'll keep that brief. We've got a special guest today. We know you guys have been clamoring for more guests on the podcast, and we thought, start of the new year, we need to start getting some more guests in. So we have a really good one today, and hopefully you guys will recognize him. We have Sam Dietterich. So basically, Sam is a first-year undergraduate at University of Minnesota.
First-year graduate, student.
Did I say that?
Yeah, you said undergrad.
Oh, my bad. No, not undergraduate.
No, definitely not.
Graduate student.
Yes.
And also, he basically is a theoretical condensed matter physicist, in the making at least. And then finally, you may recognize his YouTube channel, Dietterich Labs. It has a lot of heady physics concepts on there. Pretty insane stuff, so make sure you guys check that out. And Sam, welcome to the show, man.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Cool.
Yeah, man, we're so glad to have you on. I mean, we've been using your videos in some of our other podcasts, and they're just fucking insane.
Yeah.
To put it bluntly.
We cite our sources, but we do
yeah.
We definitely gear our listeners towards you sometimes. Just be like, hey, check that out. It's a cool video.
Yeah, man. So Sam, I guess to start, man, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well.
Cool.
I've avoided COVID, thankfully.
Yeah, this
excellent. That's
third wave or whatever wave we're on. Who knows?
Right. Me and Juan can't say the same, unfortunately.
No.
Or at least Juan definitely can't. I'm not sure if I can or not, but I've definitely been sick for a while. So that's good to hear that you've at least been staying away from the Covidicus.
How is grad life treating you? How you mentioned you're in your first year. How do you feel about the transition from undergrad to grad?
Well, grad school requires me to take fewer classes that are different from my interests. There's a lot of broad classes they require you to take in undergraduate. So that meant I spent more time in undergrad getting through classes I wasn't that interested in. So that's a positive change. I guess it's kind of fun as a TA when I'm the one proctoring the exam instead of taking it in those basic physics classes.
Yeah.
Feels a bit powerful.
Yeah.
How do you like TAing in general? Like, is it kind of a shift for you, or are you enjoying it? What do you feel about it?
It's certainly interesting. There's stuff that I like about it. I do think that I would still probably pick having my time over doing that if there was such a choice. But of all the things that I could be required to spend my time on, that's definitely not the least pleasant thing that I could do. They do give you a fair amount of freedom, at least at the U of M, on how you run your sections, so I can do it my way and try different things, that kind of thing.
Fantastic.
Right.
Yeah.
And I would assume, since you've had the YouTube channel and all, you kind of have a little bit of a passion for teaching. Is that true?
Kind of. Doing those YouTube videos doesn't feel that much like teaching. I originally started making those videos because I was trying to figure out details of calculations, and I couldn't necessarily always find either resources that talked about it at all, or at least resources that talked about it well. And so the idea was, when I finally hammered out the algebra and got it to work, which could require trying on and off for more than a year in the case of a few of the ones that I was really struggling with, I would try to make the resource that I wished I could have gone online and found. So my goal was to show enough of the algebraic details that it would be more or less impossible for anyone to get stuck.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I really appreciate your videos, honestly, Sam, because, you really don't really skip anything. And, of course, the layout's really nice, of course, with the LaTeX, which is always helpful.
Right.
You're pretty clear and just straight to the point. It's hard to get good videos like that, especially in high-level physics.
Yeah, and Sam, you bring up a good point. Do you like? I feel like my undergrad institution, I had to learn things on my own, teach myself. Is that an experience that's translated for you, like in undergrad and grad?
So pretty much always I've had to teach myself on the side. I had a somewhat easier time in undergrad because I started teaching myself physics back in high school. So, like the first time I solved the Einstein field equations for the Schwarzschild metric was in 11th grade. And that was sort of
Oh,
when I
damn.
first thought, wait a minute, I might actually be able to do theory. And that was very encouraging. There's still a lot I had to learn. Um, and so when I got to, I also did 2 years of full time PSEO. So I was able to get up into even a class that talked about quantum in high school. So then I didn't take actually all the basic classes in undergraduate. But in general, with any class that I did take, it was always a lot of self teaching. I just didn't, I don't really know how you could squeeze all the actual things that need to go on in your head to really learn it into a lecture. And then, of course, especially the research university, uh, there's a heavy pressure on everyone to not only just focus on research, but to just like really focus on publishing. So education and the amount of time people put into it can take a backseat relative to what it otherwise would, which means students are going to have to self-teach more inevitably because the professors are going to be writing whatever article. I mean, for the pressure they're under, there were some that really did a surprisingly good job when they can really kind of get away with, letting things slip. So that I was happy about. But yeah, that's kind of a problem that is going to occur at a research university with the way things are currently structured. And
Right.
that increases how much self-teaching you have to do.
Mm-hmm.
I see.
So do you translate that into your classroom? I'm curious because I don't know if you see that because I definitely had that. I shifted or I inverted that role when I was a TA. I was like very I guess because the jump from 0 to 1, like Terrence has said, it's very hard for students to make to get to grasp physics concepts. It's not the usual subject that's you usually memorize things in other fields, and you just kind of get by in that way. Where physics is more calculation
Well, it is.
oriented.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is more calculus, but it's also more calculation oriented, where students actually have to think about their priors and then really adjust things and then do processing. Um, do you feel like you inverted that, or do you feel like you kind of accept that philosophy and bring it to the classroom? How do you feel?
So I do think that it's not a particularly good thing that it is the case that you have to do a lot of self-teaching. If you can figure it out, then obviously you'll be advantaged because when you're not in school, you can keep learning and do that. So good self-teaching skills are useful, but they're paying to like go to class. So I try to not have it require self-teaching. But of course, I'm a grad student, so my time is limited as well.
Right.
I try to make my teaching as clear and straight to the kind of thinking they need to be doing. It's sort of hard to make it like my YouTube videos. My YouTube videos can be any length, and I can rely on people already having certain math skills and people being motivated. Because who's going to watch my videos if they're not motivated? They're not really general entertainment. Although sometimes I do get people who do watch them for fun somehow. Um, so I do kind of run into limitations with how much I can avoid them having to self teach. But I do keep my memory of that problem in mind, and I try to make that as unnecessary as possible. Though, probably the most significant issue I had, because I had night sections, everyone was tired, and it was also the less desirable section. So the people who procrastinated tended to sign up for it. So motivating anyone was incredibly difficult. A lot of people just wouldn't do anything or wouldn't be willing to work in groups, or they would be unwilling to really think about it. They might even be willing to spend time on physics, but at the bottom end of it, it's so different from what their interests actually are that it was like they didn't want to let that time include actually really sincerely trying to think about physics concepts.
Right.
So I experienced some cases of them just looking at like the discussion section problems and not immediately knowing how to do it, and sort of asking questions long before they'd actually tried to think about it. And then, if my answer didn't immediately give them exactly what they needed, they would just keep asking. They were like trying to get me to do their thinking for them.
Right.
Yeah, I
So
think it's a common
working
problem.
through those kinds of motivation issues is probably the biggest obstacle to any part of teaching, let alone teaching so effectively. They had to do less self-teaching.
Right. I ask these questions because I consider you a sort of YouTube educator, a physics educator online. And I'm just curious how you bridge that gap or how you approach that, because your videos are very succinct and they're very well put together in terms of being able to follow, at least like us with physics backgrounds, we are motivated sort of intrinsically, but yeah, no, I mean, it just good to know. I don't know if Terrence, you have.
Yeah. So I guess kind of to switch gears a little bit, I kind of wanted to know, Sam, how you even got into physics, man, because you've got a really advanced understanding of physics, and you're only a first-year graduate. I mean, you're past me and Juan, who've been in graduate school for 4 years, in many different areas. So I'm just curious on how you even got started, how long you've been interested, what interested you in the beginning. I mean, yeah, what
What's your journey?
yeah, what's your journey exactly?
My journey has been downright weird. Like really weird. I've not met somebody yet in person anyway that had a journey as strange. But my thinking about the world in a scientific manner kind of started long before I realized what science was. Right. So my growing up situation, I was born in California, and my parents didn't really interfere too much with how I thought. It was a kind of a psychologically pristine environment. I didn't have a lot of ideas or ideologies implanted in me. I kind of could do whatever I wanted. And my parents also didn't worry too much if I had eclectic interests. Some parents might. And so I was really allowed to just kind of find my own way. So it could be kind of strange. One thing that I do remember is that the only thing in my environment I couldn't understand, that I could see, really, I didn't understand any of it, but the only thing I knew I couldn't understand was fire. I didn't understand how fire worked. It was the strangest, most powerful thing. So then I obsessed with fire and candles. I was a bit pyromaniac because I didn't understand danger really when I was that young. And I started categorizing everything in my environment as a function of how flammable it was and what its fire-related properties were, as an effort to understand this one big mystery that I knew of around me. And I didn't recognize that as taking a scientific approach, if a very naive one, but it kind of was. And that started my way of thinking in that direction early on. Now, then, when I was 10, we moved to Minnesota, and that was nice because it's way cheaper here than in California. I lived in San Jose in the Bay Area. My dad worked in tech, and he was able to move to Minnesota without a salary cut. So then it was just basically extra money because it was cheaper.
Yeah.
And when I got here, I was in fourth grade. It wasn't actually until sixth grade that the next kind of stage of getting to physics came up. And it was actually into chemistry, and then chemistry eventually led to physics. Now, I remember in sixth grade science class hearing about periodic tables and thinking, that really seems like the kind of thing I'd be into, and then procrastinating looking it up. Then when I finally did look it up, I remember that night more clearly than I do pretty much any day from that far back in my past. I just looked up all the different elements on Wikipedia. And it was like, it was just insane. It was exactly what I would have been interested in. There were these different elements which were fundamental, so they immediately had meaning, and they had all these bizarre properties, and even more than these bizarre, crazy properties, but those properties had structure to it, such that you could fit them into a periodic table. And all of those things, this really crazy set of properties that made them seem like potions, and chemistry like potions class or something like that, combined with their fundamental meaning and the fact that there was understandable and really elegant structure to it all, meant that I was immediately transfixed. I started trying to collect elements, which, some of them are dangerous. I didn't let that stop me. My parents weren't always that thrilled with it, but they tried to let me do what I could. And I ended up learning enough chemistry just by sort of absorbing it, that when I got to honors chem in high school, on the first day, they said I knew too much and moved me to AP chemistry. And so that was kind of fun. Then AP chemistry went well. But about halfway through AP chemistry, I had become much more aware of the broader story of science, like the different subjects and how they're related. And I found the more advanced ones, like physics, to be both harder, but also more interesting. So I was kind of trying to decide some kind of a direction. I realized that there was one that would be more comfortable in the immediate future, which was to do the easier sciences that I was interested in, or what I viewed to be easier. So chemistry, the ones that didn't challenge me as much. And I was kind of dreading the challenge of the more advanced ones. Then I decided that if I went the easy route, well, I would always have those more advanced subjects that were fundamentally more interesting to me kind of looming over me with some sense of regret, and that I probably should just bite the bullet and try for the really advanced ones, see if I could actually learn crazy physics. So I pivoted off of chemistry. I borrowed a calculus textbook from the math department and started teaching myself calculus. I was in 10th grade. I think by the summer
Sam,
between 10th and 11th grade, I had just barely learned enough differential equations and math like that to try solving the free Schrodinger equation. I had just learned kind of enough about calculus and differential equations to be able to solve the Schrodinger equation, the free Schrodinger equation, just for the plane wave solution. And I didn't even have enough math skills yet to know how to impose boundary conditions to like get the infinite potential well solution or something like that. I hadn't gotten there yet, but was just barely able to do that. And it was enormously encouraging. And it gave me the first inkling of an actual understanding of what the Schrodinger equation was, because I had some kind of familiarity of what sorts of concepts were actually involved. And that was a start. This was summer between 10th and 11th grade, and I kept trying very hard to learn physics as however I could throughout the next semester. And this was when it was actually 11th grade. It was my first year of full-time PSEO at a nearby community college. And that gave me more time, actually. And it also counted for college credit. So it was like I was getting paid to do less. It was really convenient. I don't know why everyone wouldn't do that had the chance, but there were some that didn't want to for some reason. But the process of learning physics in the beginning was trying to self-teach crazy physics. It felt like I was drowning. Every time I tried, I would become more aware of more physics that I didn't know and was far from understanding. And I would only gain a little bit more knowledge. So it was really quite stressful. There was a lot of anxiety, a lot of, I really, really, really want to. The more I became aware of it, the more I wanted it, but the more it seemed unlikely that I'd be able to do it. And so it was really not the most comfortable of times. But at the same time, I also had nothing else to do. So there wasn't really a give up option. I would just end up sitting there and starting physics again. It's kind of like, if that's all you have to do, then you're going to do it.
Yeah, right.
And it wasn't until a little ways into the second semester of 11th grade that I actually knew just enough about gravity to not just solve the EFE for the Schwarzschild metric, but kind of understand all of the parts of how it worked. And when I got those first Christoffel symbols to turn out right, it was like I was way more happy than anyone should ever be about Christoffel symbols. But when I finished the calculation, it was the first meaningful bit of evidence that actually convinced me, maybe I could do this. I've still got a ton to do, but it was significant to me only because of how encouraging it was and how much it was like sort of an island in this like sea of kind of tense struggle. But that's how it was. And then I continued heading in the direction of field theory, learning about symmetries, etc., throughout the rest of senior year, and I just barely started trying to introduce myself to quantum field theory in the summer between senior year and the first year of college. I worked through the first basic tree level QED calculations that I did in my freshman year of undergraduate. And this was where I first got into calculations where I couldn't find complete workings of them. So I really did sometimes just have to figure it out. And if I couldn't figure out the algebra, then I was just screwed. And there were a few where I actually couldn't figure out the simplification. I couldn't quite figure out, I knew I had gotten it right through all of like the quantum field theory bits, but simplifying down the final cross section to get the beautiful famous result for like the Bethe-Heitler formula or the molar scattering cross section formula, I just couldn't get the algebra to work. It was like a dumb reason to be stopped at the end. But eventually, a while later, I figured out the tricks for it. Turns out with the molar one, you just have to have the right trig identities, and you have to organize the calculation very well in order to not make an algebra error. And then it all falls into place. And it was a wonderful feeling because that had been something that stopped me before. And then the problem I had with the Bethe-Heitler formula calculation was that I was trying to plug in the parameterization for the momentum vectors before I simplified. And that's what works with the molar formula and what works with a lot of them. In fact, with some of them, it's quite important to do that because it brings about simplification. But with the Bethe-Heitler formula, you want to simplify down before you insert the parameterization. It's way easier. And then when you finally do, it just comes out magically. And that was also satisfying. I continued trying to figure out field theory. Towards the end of my freshman year, I was becoming more and more aware that a way I had thought before was wrong. I sort of bought into this idea that we're kind of told that if we are good at something, success will just somehow naturally come. Right? All you have to worry about is being good enough to deserve the success. And you don't actually have to do anything to make sure success comes as a result of it. It's somehow like you just have to focus on being good, and the world is somehow exactly fair enough that good will give you the proportional reward. And I started to become more and more aware of the fact that actually yielding success from any ability you have is going to be its own separate task. And it won't just happen automatically. I've got to actually do something to try and make that happen. So I started trying to think of things I could use what physics I did know to do. And the only thing I could think of was YouTube. It didn't really seem like that many people would want to watch videos of that type. But I figured, well, there's not much else I can do with this right now anyway, so I may as well try and do something with it. And that actually helped motivate me to do more calculations. And that continued throughout undergraduate and grad school. I've been too busy. And also, it is a lot of work. And only so many people are ever going to watch it. So, I kind of have to wait until the motivation strikes. Because after enough really, really significant labor that I knew wasn't going to yield a ton of like YouTube success or whatever, it does make me want to put some effort into other things.
Right.
And I guess that's why videos like that are unusual. That's why I, couldn't find the resources that I wanted, because who's going to make them? And then, I made some of them and found out why people don't make them.
That's really a compelling story, man. And it makes a lot of sense. I just can't believe you were able to start in that real kind of like backwards manner and still be able to do these super, advanced calculations and things. Because from what my understanding, it sounds like you jumped into like Einstein field equations before you even knew classical mechanics. Is that true?
So my mind is pretty well equipped for understanding this. I knew what classical mechanics was. I knew its general concept. I understood what Lagrangians were, what Hamiltonians were, that they're related, Poisson brackets. I didn't have a lot of experience with it, but none of the story of classical mechanics was really lost on me. All the concepts were there. Now, the fact that I just had the story and had only done a little bit of practice did mean that, and to some extent, I guess it's still true, the areas where I'm most likely to make a mistake or not know the answer is actually like some of the most basic stuff. So it's
Right.
like when I started TAing, I had to, note that. And it's actually been good for me because it's helped sort of even me out a little bit. So I didn't not know classical mechanics, but you are right in that my knowledge was definitely weighted towards the advanced stuff. This also had the weird effect of making classes easier and easier for me as they got harder and harder because it was more and more stuff I'd already done before. So,
Yeah, that's you're the kind of student where it's like the normies like me and Juan see, and we're like, fuck, why is this guy, why is this getting easier for this guy?
Why is he here? Why he should be in grad school already.
That's really cool though, man. I think
Yeah.
that's kind of an underrated way to do things. You kind of did it the way where you let your passions kind of take you to where you thought you needed to go, and honestly, it's more proof to how non-linear. I don't know if that's the right word to use, but like
Yeah, I mean,
learning physics is not. You don't have to always do it in a linear fashion. I think that's kind of inspiring for people who want to actually jump in, even who don't have the formal education. That you can learn a lot of this really advanced stuff as long as you have the motivation, and you just have the wherewithal to know yourself enough to really, I guess, just be passionate enough about the problems to do them.
like, would you say that some of the fields that you encountered, I would say GR is sort of a self-contained subject, meaning that you just pick up the tools and you learn as you go. Do you feel it's the same way with QFT? I ask because I've taken a sort of branding of QFT. It's quantum many-body, or which some people are
For the
trying to,
condensed matter people,
yeah, for condensed
typically.
matter people. So it's not the the sort of sexy QFT. It's the cousin or something. I don't know.
Right.
It's yeah.
QFT is a whole lot messier than GR.
Mhm.
It's a lot more intricate, a lot more abstract, a lot less elegant. GR is this sort of like this perfect physics subject. It is self contained, it's perfectly beautiful, it's perfectly smooth. It is exactly what the ideal physics topic would be. It's so complete and so non messy. It's just this ideal thing. Nothing is that clean and self contained and pretty except GR. And QFT is sort of the other end of it. It's messy. It's kind of like an agglomeration of all kinds of different pieces. It's much more. The subject doesn't tell you how to calculate the rest of the subject. It's more you just have to figure out what works. And that's really because you're trying ultimately to get a quantum theory from a classical theory. When classical theory doesn't imply quantum theory, it's the other way around. And you can get many different quantum theories that imply the same classical limit. So it's a more of, what works. First of all, what gives you results that mean anything, that still gives you the right classical limit. And then second, what matches the experiment. And then there are going to be all kinds of different weird formulations that are complicated and abstract that end up mapping into each other. They're just different formulations of the same thing. So it ends up being kind of a weird, messy mosaic. It's just not like GR, and that makes it harder to learn.
Mm. And just to pause for a second, Juan, are we good on time still? Do
Yeah,
you know if
yeah.
it drops off?
No.
Okay.
Should be fine.
So then, Sam, I guess that leads me to the next question. What was I going to say? Shoot, I'm drawing a blank.
Well, I'm just amazed. While Terrence comes up with the question, I'm just shocked, just because for me, I had a very similar path. I grew up thinking scientifically. I even had a little. There's a picture, a little photograph that my mom has of me looking in a refrigerator, and I had my little theories about why the light turns off.
Right.
The little, what makes the light go off,
Mm-hmm.
and I had a hypothesis. One hypothesis was that miniature penguins were living in the freezer.
And they would slowly unscrew the light bulb.
Right. I don't know what my imagination had thought of, but towards the end, I ruled out a bunch of hypotheses, and I didn't know what it was. But ultimately, I figured out that there was a little button right next to the door. And I was like, oh, of course. That's where I learned where realism is really how you explain reality. What's the most realistic thing? But that kind of thinking pervades, like you were saying, sort of naively, some scientific way of thinking about the world, and that pervaded my thinking, and I also ended up through the chemistry pipeline to physics, just because you're
Well, more bio though, right? Wouldn't you say?
right. Well, I went to bio and being like, life is everything, and then just once I got into college, I took basic chemistry and general chemistry, and I had more questions about orbitals and what makes those, and then they're like, well, it's quantum mechanics, and I'm like, what the hell is quantum mechanics? And by this time, I was 20 years old, just figuring out that physics existed as a subject.
And what's interesting is, Sam, you mentioned that you kind of were a little bit intimidated by physics in the beginning. And I found that kind of a thing that a lot of physicists kind of run into. It's like, can I even do this? Like, should I try to commit to this even? Because I'm just like, I'm not a genius.
Right.
If I do this, I'm just going to be wasting my time, and I'm just going to be even more down on myself because I'm not going to actually be able to solve anything.
Right.
But then you get this weird confidence once you kind of do your first legit or couple legit physics problems. And I thought that was really interesting that you mentioned that even a guy who's as advanced as you are in these topics, that you even had that same kind of crossroads.
I remember in 10th grade a specific moment when I made that kind of decision. I was actually standing at the ladder of my bunk bed, and I was thinking, so there are two possible theories here. One is that there actually are people who have special brains that can do this, and I knew I wasn't one. And the other possibility was that it's actually a bunch of psychology that stops most people from going in or thinking that they can't, a lack of exposure to it, a lack of thinking in that way, a lack of realizing what it actually takes and what it doesn't, and then the people who actually figure that out are just assumed to be brilliant. And then that would predict maybe I could go into it. And I ultimately stopped trying to figure out which it was. I said, I don't know which it is. I'm just going to try it, and that'll be my experiment. If I can do it, well, then it must be the non-genius theory. If I can't do it, well, maybe it's the genius theory.
Right.
So I formulated even my decision to go into physics as an experiment.
That definitely hits home.
Yeah, it does. I had my calculation was everything else is easy, because I was like, well, bio's easy, but I don't want to go to med school. And then chemistry is, it's like you were saying, it's not, it doesn't answer all my questions. So I'm going to be ultimately dissatisfied with whatever sort of answers come out of it. Material answers. I wanted more. I wanted something deeper, more fundamental. And for me, physics was kind of this subject, for the geniuses, for genius only kind of thing. And there was a wall, or maybe a perception of a wall or something. But I was like, well, I'm paying for this. If I'm an idiot, they should at least know how to teach an idiot. because I should be able to learn this if I'm paying somebody. I'm paying somebody to teach me something hard. So that for me, that was my logic towards just approaching physics. Well, it's like, well, if now's the time to learn it, I'm gonna have someone here to guide me if they can, because I certainly could not teach myself as much as or as efficiently as I would if I was having somebody guide me. Hats off to you. You actually went through the whole rigor of doing it on your own. Like, this is something that that turns off a lot of people about physics, just because the amount of lifting that you have to do by yourself is just insurmountable a lot of the time. It's just like the frustration of doing, even something simple like an algebra calculation could stop you from getting to the final answer, and it's just a headache for a lot lot but
yeah, that actually kind of sorry to interrupt a little one, but it kind of leads me to the next question that
go for it.
I was trying to think of with Sam, because it is kind of interesting that he got over that hump, and I think is one of the hardest psychological humps of physics. And what's more so than another layer is that you actually have to be able to sort through the information properly. So with physics, there's just so much info, right? It can be a mountain of just junk. Well, not junk, but it's just so much shit you have to sift through. You actually kind of have to narrow in what is actually important and what is not. So Sam, how did you... Oh, shoot. What was that?
Can you hear us, Sam? Did we lose you?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, okay, good.
So, sorry to pick up. So how did you actually figure out, at that age, to cut through kind of the BS information? And how did you actually get to the point where you found a way to find what was relevant to actually study?
I can tell you exactly how I did that. Part of the challenge of learning physics was learning how to learn physics. And that was exactly the question you're asking. Basically, when I started, I didn't know the story of physics, or what I call the story of physics. I didn't know what the different subjects were in physics, and I didn't know how they were related to each other, and I didn't know why. So when I would hear discussion of it, it was not in the context of the story of physics. So I really didn't know what to do with any of the pieces of information. And it was through Leonard Susskind's theoretical minimum lectures that I got the first idea of the story of physics. And then I could place all this information I was getting, and that helped process it. I could learn it a lot more effectively when I knew some idea what the heck the given information had anything to do with, where it was in that story of physics. Like, there's classical physics, statistical physics, both classical and quantum. There's quantum physics, there's gravity, there's field theory, and how all these things are interrelated, and some historical context. With all of that, I could process the information, figure out what was important for what I was doing then, what was important at all, where it all went, and then it was actually doable. And when I got into quantum field theory and it was this chaotic nightmare mess, I also had that same problem, but I had gone through that problem before, so I knew what to do. There's a quantum field theory textbook that a friend just gave me, and it happened to be, by luck, the right thing for this. It's criticized a lot by people who really teach quantum field theory because it's probably not good for the most detailed, technically rigorous approach. It's actually by Michio Kaku, but it's a mathematical textbook. It's his Intro to Quantum Field Theory. And the approach he takes is to cover all the subjects lightly, but cover a much broader chunk of subjects across quantum field theory, from the beginnings of classical field theory as is relevant to heading into quantum, all the way to an introduction to string theory. And while that does mean it's too light to satisfy really any QFT professor, it does mean that it gives you that story of physics, that story of quantum field theory. So if I'm going to learn quantum field theory, and it is this chaotic nightmare of weird abstract stuff, I'm going to need to know how to place all that in the story of quantum field theory, so I know what is important and why it's important, and what it even means to start my learning process with. And that textbook did a good job giving me the story of quantum field theory, so that then the other textbooks and things I might look at weren't so out of context. I could actually understand what it was at least trying to teach me and what that had to do with anything. So it
Really
was
interesting.
two versions of the same story, physics broadly, and then the same thing happened again when I went into specifically QFT.
Very cool, man. So the lesson of the day for the people out there is definitely, if you want to learn physics on your own, it's it seems from what Sam is saying that it's nice to get the full story first, and I guess you get the big picture in your mind. Once you've got the
Yeah,
big picture in your
the
mind,
layout kind of.
right, then I guess you have supplemental materials that can go deeper, but
Mhm.
you need something to guide your thinking. I guess if you, it's like you almost use that, um, like the Michio Kaku book as a surrogate professor in some ways.
Kinda, yeah. Uh-huh.
That's really interesting, man. I like that technique.
Yeah, would you say it's kind of like you were well, was it more of an optimization thing? Like you're like, I have very limited time. I have to, survey the field and pick, it sounds to me like you wanted to go straight to QFT, but didn't know how to
Hmm.
bridge yourself from that. Did you like scout Wikipedia? Did you look up books? Did you like what resources sort of did you gravitate to? Because you seem to have done it in the way that's like you saw that classical mechanics was really kind of more of an exercise in calculus, really. I mean, there's very little concepts that you can kind of get there besides classical field theory stuff, but then you go into StatMech, you skip that. It sounds to me like you kind of skirted over the stuff and stuck to like Lagrangian like stuff, concepts, I should say, and Hamiltonian concepts. And what resources pulled you to help you go towards QFT?
So it is true that when I first started trying to go the physics direction, my entire goal from the beginning was QFT. Specifically, I wanted to understand particle physics enough to really see what the heck the standard model really was. That only came years later. So it very much was trying to find the most realistic pathway to that, whatever I could do. So it was like if that thing didn't specifically get me there, I didn't do it. And I think the first thing that did give me the story of physics, or the layout of the physics that I needed to get going, was um, Leonard Susskind's theoretical minimum lectures. There was a lot of Wikipedia-ing, but that was difficult because it gave no context and assumes
Right.
an advanced technical knowledge in a lot of cases. I did sort of like looking at the symbols. I thought they were pretty, but I didn't really know what they mean. So that wasn't too helpful. Now I use it because it actually has random bits of technical stuff that I can compare my answers to. It's like, wow, finally it's actually useful. And my dad also had a Diffie-Q textbook left over from when he learned that as an electrical engineer, and I started fiddling with that, and that led to that plane wave solution to the Schrodinger equation that I was finally able to do. It got me at least doing math, and I started with that before I'd even learned what partial derivatives were, and it started talking about partial differential equations, and then I had to like look up what partial derivatives were. I was like, oh well, that's not too hard. It's basically just an ordinary derivative, but you're treating the other things as constants, both in the limit definition and the actual derivative rules that you use for doing practical calculations. It was another example of it being very nonlinear. Then I started using lectures from an Indian YouTube channel that's put out by the Indian government. It's made by two universities in India, IIT and the India Institute of Science. And then there's Balakrishnan quantum lectures, and there was a QFT series, and there was a relativistic quantum series, and that was just really helpful. Man,
Yes.
those lectures are good.
Sam, let me just say, yes, I 100% agree with you.
Right.
These lectures are amazing. Go look at them now. I used them as a supplement to my course when I was taking Quantum Anybody, Condensed Matter QFT. And it was just sometimes better than the professor lecture. It was amazing.
National Project for Technology Enhanced Learning is what it's
Right.
called. And it's put
NPTEL.
out by the Ministry of Human Resource Development in India. So I think the YouTube channel is like just the letters for the symbolism of National Project for Technology Enhanced Learning, and then HRD at the end for Human Resource Development.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's just thousands of videos, and not all of them are high production value, but the content is great. And that's basically what I try to do with my YouTube channel. Not going to be managing good production, but I can maybe make the content valuable.
Mm-hmm.
So that helped a lot. I'd spent a ton of the last 2 years of high school watching those videos, especially my senior year, and then also into grad school, or sorry, undergraduate. But the reason why I was able to push farther than a lot of people self-teaching wasn't actually because I had some special ability to it. Most people just don't push nearly as hard as I did. Now, it may seem like I had more effective techniques, but I only figured those out by pushing harder. I mean, part of pushing hard is not just to learn physics, but learn how to learn physics. And I mean, I had very little social life for the second half of high school and most of undergraduate. I spent so many hours, many hours just pushing really, really, really hard, reading some of these books 10 times over just to familiarize myself, doing literally anything I could manage to get myself a step forward. It wasn't effort efficient overall. It was just, I really pushed as hard as I could manage to. And a lot of times I did burn out, but I would stop and then think, what else do I have to do? And then it was basically like I'd get back in my relationship with physics, regardless of how tough it was, because there was nobody else to date. It was just like, it was going to be physics or nothing, and I wasn't going to sit there. So, I mean, it wasn't always pretty. It was kind of stressful.
Oh yeah. It's definitely
true scientist.
Yeah, it's
respect.
It's unfortunate how abusive the relationship is with physics, because
yes,
it's incredibly humbling, but also just like you feel like an idiot sometimes. You're like, I don't get this, and you just
right. And yeah, I think it's just really cool that you actually were able to figure out some of these kind of, to me, that weren't so obvious concepts so early on, like just being able to cut away information, and as you keep saying, how to learn physics. Like for me, that was something that wasn't even obvious. Like actually trying to learn particular, I guess, the core of the concepts that you're trying to learn. Because, I actually think that I was a little bit stunted in that sense because I had the professor. So the professor kind of spoon-fed me what I needed to learn, so I never actually learned how to cut away information, or what information was not as important to learn until way later in graduate school even. So I think that's really an interesting thing, and probably a very, very valuable skill that you learned by being a self-learner.
Because I think I don't know if I speak for all undergrad physicists, but I think I have the same sentiment as you. I trusted that the institutions knew what the most optimal path was to get to this end goal. And coming out of it into grad school, you're like, oh no, this is like, some of the things are nice little subjects to know, but we never even got to the most modern theories of physics, which is QFT and all that stuff, because we followed so much of their layout. And then for me, I definitely felt a sense of burnout a lot of the time. I'm kind of interested to see how you engaged with this, Sam, because you're in a unique position, being that you had already far surpassed what some of these classes required, but you were already in there like a sort of elephant in the room, just being like, I already know this. And I'm kind of interested to see how professors took that dynamic, but yeah.
So there's a number of things to be said about that. The first thing is I was somewhat stunted by a lack of test-taking skills. And you really learn just how different test-taking skills are from actual science skills when you are very self-taught. Because you can see how far you've gotten. You can see you really can do it. You can see you have the skills that are really important. whereas most people don't have that point of comparison. Then you go and you take these tests, and that's when you notice how different the skill sets really are. And I noticed it whether or not I did well. And sometimes I'd do really well, sometimes I wouldn't, and it was pretty random. And that highlighted not just how different the skill sets were, and but how random it could really be regardless. I've never been good at memorizing. I've never been good at I've never been good at speed thinking. I've never been good at bodging together shoddy work that's enough to get points. I'm good at slow, high quality work. And that tends to be more relevant in research, but it's not very relevant in literally any of what they measure you on, or well, not literally any, but a lot of what they measure on. Now, I could pick up some of the test taking skills, so I'd have a pretty decent record, but it was definitely like a nuisance and a problem. And it highlighted, to me anyway, that I really shouldn't trust institutions to know what I should be doing, because they're, in kind of a big way, in my view, misincentivizing skill development. They're incentivizing the wrong skills. They're filtering based on the wrong skills. And they're doing it to a large extent because tests are the only way of measuring people that's so easy and effortless for them that they still can focus on what they really care about, which, to me anyway, I'm a bit cynical, repeatedly seems to be like publishing prestige.
Right.
I mean, the motto of my school is driven to discover. It always kind of baffled me because it seems like it should be driven to educate. So much of the institution is funded and supported by the public because of its educational services. Seems like that's what people support universities for more than their research, although the research is still recognized as important by the public. And they seem to like reverse that at research universities. And a lot of times when I looked at the research, it didn't even seem like they were driven to discover. It seemed like it was driven to publish. Right. And that should be their motto, just driven to publish. I mean, like, and the one thing that really explicitly highlighted this to me when I got to grad school, they said that the approach that the advisor was supposed to help you get was, what is the smallest thing that's still interesting? Right. Like when you're trying to pick a research topic, what is the smallest step forward that's still interesting? And to me, that seems like not what a true dedicated scientist would do. It would be, what is the most important thing you could do? What's the most interesting thing you could do? When you say, what's the smallest thing that's still interesting, that sounds like a very publishing-centric approach. That sounds like you're just, above all else, trying to minimize the risk of not being able to publish, because you're trying to do the smallest thing that still can get published. That's very published risk minimization, not advanced science in an ambitious way. And I think that attitude also distracts them from teaching as well as they could. I mean, the theory associated with having professors teach classes is that their real world expertise will help. But my opinion is that they often are so dissuaded from spending really careful, meticulous time on it, that benefit doesn't really come in that well. And a really dedicated professor, like a professional teacher who was interested in just figuring out the best way to teach that class and only had that to think about all day, would probably yield more benefit from that dedication than they're likely to yield by supposedly infusing their expertise. I mean, a lot of times, so it seems like with a lot of these professors, in order to actually yield that theoretical benefit of actually having a research professor teach a class, especially in the lower level ones. I mean, this problem is most pronounced in the low level ones where their expertise is the least relevant. It seems like they would have to spend even more time than a dedicated professional, not only to match the dedicated professional teacher's yield, but then to also infuse benefit from their expertise on top of that. And that's just a huge amount of time. I don't think it'd be fair to ask professors to do that and research at the same time. So I'm just not as convinced that this benefit of having, or supposed benefit of having research professors teach classes, particularly at lower levels, perhaps not in the like upper level grad classes, is really so good. right? It seems like when I keep looking at academia and their delivery of tertiary education, I see like what I consider to be a lot of problems. Tests, having the wrong skill set really required, not really being that motivated to spend a ton of time on the teaching. And when they do get to research, I see this publishing first perspective rather than a science first perspective. It really is not what I was hoping it would be. And it's probably why I don't want to actually continue in research after grad school.
Really? So, what would you want
Yeah,
to do after graduate school?
I don't know. Wall
Researcher.
Street.
Well,
Wall Street.
oh, damn, we lost another.
Well, no. Actually, that's the ultimate goal for a lot of us. We're like, we want the independence to just do whatever we
yeah,
want.
but it's like I get what Sam's saying because it's such a flawed system now. It's like you do lose guys who would otherwise be extremely good contributors in the field because of all the stupidity and institutions.
The metric testing.
But this is one of these things where I'm just like, I don't know what you can really do because this is just a flaw of institutions. When institutions get too big or they run their course for too long, they always get shitty. So it's like, what can you really do?
There's a YouTube video. I think it's by a channel called Medlife Crisis or something. I don't remember. But it's on how publishing changed in the scientific world. It used to be that you didn't pay for publications or something, and then some British publisher realized that actually you could make a lot of money by funneling it through a profitable journal, and he captured the market by making a journal and then claiming that it was the best of the best and successfully. And then suddenly people could only publish in there if they wanted to get read. And so they did, but then that meant that was the only journals like that were the only places where these things were getting published. So then you had to read them. And then it just became this feedback loop that kept the publishing and the reading under this profit model. And so you get a small number of prestigious journals and everyone's obsessed with just publishing them. It's taken over science to the point where it's now driven to publish instead of driven to discover. And it kind of started with that change in the publishing industry. At least that's my understanding. So this is one of the few times where the past may have actually been better.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they still have testing, etc., and other problems, but I am actually under the impression that science was more about science on the research side a while ago. And I think Higgs, after he won the Nobel Prize, said something like, if I had started my career these days, I don't know if I would have been able to do as well. And then a lot of people of his generation were like, well, had it been so much about the quantity instead of the quality, so much about the minimum step forward that's still interesting, had it been so much about this public publishing centric thing, then maybe there wouldn't have been room for them to actually do riskier, more difficult, slower and fewer, but much more important steps forward.
Right.
Do you have any ideas on what could be done to let's say Sam, if you could have a ideal situation, what would you do? Yeah.
One starting idea. So the University of Minnesota has a wealthy library system. It spends like $100 million a year providing its resources. And one of the big things they spend on is subscriptions to these for-profit journals. It seems like if universities spent their money supporting journals that, or hosting journals, like at the university, a university journal that published things for free, that would obviously cost money, but clearly if they're spending that much on subscriptions, they could change the expenditure on subscriptions to funding journals that don't require subscriptions. That way, everyone can access the information legally. I realize Sci-Hub exists. It's great. Anyway, they could spend the money they're already spending on this much more effective system. So switching library expenditure to hosting free journals that everyone publishes in, that everyone can access, rather than paying a for-profit, not free journal just for access. I also don't particularly like that this system forces researchers to slave over these pieces of gold called research articles, only to not be paid for them and be underpaid for their normal job. And the journal just gets all the money, and it's like profit margin that well dwarfs Amazon and any normal really rich corporation, which are making a few percent profit in a lot of cases. It's like they're being paid a ton of money to be more or less by force of situation given these researchers hard-earned gold so that they can make the money. It's like this system is backwards somehow. And if journals were free and paid for by universities with some of the money that they're spending on the subscriptions, and right now we're not just covering with that subscription the cost of supplying the journal, we're also paying for their profit margin. So presumably it would be cheaper for universities to just host that many journals, the same or more journals. They could afford more because they wouldn't be paying for someone's profit margin for really creating essentially no value, because their valuable product is slaved over by somebody that gives it to them for free by force of situation. So that's the first change I would make.
So that's pretty interesting. Now, you are aware of the journal archive, though, yes?
Yes, and that's good. That's a help.
Right. It seems like more, research scientists are trying to put their research available on archive as well as the other journals. So maybe in time they'll switch over completely. Do you think that would help the situation?
I'm sure, and that might end up being what happens instead of what I'm proposing. The question I have, though, is if that kind of thing exists, then why? I mean, I'm familiar with it. My theory on why it hasn't already eliminated journals is because there's so much on there. To get attention on your specific thing, you still need to publish in journals, and that's why journals still have a value proposition. And so my idea then would be these university journals could be what kind of journals are now, just a way of highlighting what definitely is already available. So then there still is this process of vetting, but it doesn't pick what is available at all. It merely picks what gets the spotlight.
I see.
Yeah.
So ultimately, people are going to have to cut the cord from the journal if anything real is going to have to happen.
The culture.
I suspect.
Yeah, it sounds to me like the cultural arms race, at least in academia, to publish or perish is very. It's highly problematic. I mean, as you're laying out here, Sam, I think I agree with you in the sense that it's sort of a trickle down effect throughout the system. Because I honestly wish that there could just be full-time professors and full-time researchers. But
Yeah.
institutions
Then that's
don't
double
do
the
that.
cost now.
Well,
Nobody wants to pay that.
but the thing is, you're half-assing two things when you get one person to do it. So
Right.
it's like the institutions, I think, are doing a weighted a cost benefit sort of calculation. It's like, well, two beats one, right? And you're trying to find the one person that does the most.
Mm-hmm.
So the system is
It's just
selecting.
like graduate students. You know,
Exactly.
It's like they pay graduate students in peanuts because they're high skilled labor, and you can do that. So it's like it's all down to money at the end of the day, right? The problems are solved by fixing money. Go ahead, Sam.
One of the things that I have noticed, I think that the value of not half-assing it like that would be clearer to people if more people were aware of how it's actually working. Like even I, as a science enthusiast, went into a university thinking that academia basically works like this sort of romantic theoretical ideal of it all being about the right things. And I didn't properly realize that it wasn't until I got there. So if I didn't even know, then not a lot of people are. And this stuff is hard to measure in a really clear, explicit way that doesn't take a lot of perspective to really understand, a lot of perspective from just having been exposed to it. So a lot of, it's kind of like anytime there's a problem people are supposed to be working on that's hard to measure, they can kind of just sort of argue they are, whether or not it's actually really working, because there isn't much of a check on it. And it's just like that. I mean, it's if these problems ever are brought up, whatever university administrator can set up some program and make some kind of flowery argument that it's addressing the problem, and then they can keep their position. But it's not like anyone's measuring well enough to really measure whether or not it's actually eliminating the problem.
Right.
So problems tend to get solved when there's not just a will to address them, but also a really good way and a broad awareness of how well the thing that whoever is doing is actually working.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of stuff's tricky to track.
Right.
Yeah, that's really good points.
Well, Sam, I do see a cultural shift. Luckily, you know, there is
Yes.
there's sort of a movement to move away from exams. Have sort of going back to the old system. There's a lot of oral examinations where you actually where to progress towards a graduate degree, it's less focused on the sort of the presumed knowledge base that you got from your undergrad, but now shifting towards more of a research focused, actually preparing you for your career graduate program. So a couple
That's good. Yeah.
yeah, a couple
I mean,
schools.
I'm not
Sorry, I don't know if
I'm
UM
not
is
the
like
only
this,
one
but
talking about these ideas, and I am happy to hear other people talk about some of what I'm thinking. So it's
right.
definitely not like nobody's trying, and that's good.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, me, I mean, I'm the number one guy saying I fucking hate tests. So
Look, I hate
I'm
tests
so
too.
you know, and bureaucracy and the institutions. So I'm right there
Yeah.
with you, man.
Terrence and I are very much of the same cloth.
Yeah.
I mean, Sam, we 100% agree with you. Like, we're both our approach to thinking is methodical and very well. What most people would say slow, but it's just making sure that the
Higher
things
quality.
Yeah,
right.
it's real science in my opinions.
Quality takes, yes, exactly. Quality takes time.
Mhm.
And it's actually somewhat more difficult for me to bring this to the attention of other people in my graduate program. I've done it and successfully, but it takes some like actually skilled arguing because they're the ones that were filtered out by tests. So they
Right,
all like them.
exactly.
They're the ones that were rewarded by that.
That's
And
so
the ones
true.
that may have skill deficits in doing actual science, which is a slow, methodical, high quality, and creative. It's like you have to get to the point where you can handle your deep conceptual understanding, which you have to begin with, so nimbly that you can actually apply it in a creative way,
Mhm.
right? And get it to
Right.
the point where you can actually work with this stuff in the context of creativity. It's just never something that's going to fit on a test.
Mhm.
So true, man. Yeah, maybe. I mean, there's a lot of things that can be changed. I feel like that need to be changed in academia, and I think that the institution has gone so long that it's starting to weed out the exact people that you want to retain. And
Yeah.
I think that's a real problem right now. So,
Do
you
you
know, whatever can be done, I think we need to really start analyzing this issue soon.
Yeah, do you think it's any mystery why people are saying why haven't we had the next Einstein or the next
That's one of the things that I've thought. A lot of these things getting worse at some point, particularly, or perhaps trickle down effects from the publishing industry changing
Mhm.
and other things like that that may have contributed. I do think that exactly what an Einstein would look like may have to change, though, because even if we had those systems all perfect, physics is getting quite literally harder,
Right.
and it's getting quite literally like bigger and more intricate. So the idea that we would have no specialization, well, we'd probably have some. It would just be much less rigid. And I mean this, and there would probably be fewer papers getting published, but better ones. And things would be less regimented because that's not conducive to the creativity we need. But I do think that it would have had to have changed a little bit. I mean, the subject of GR, obviously, he had to be a genius to come up with it, but it did have to be still this really beautiful, cohesive, like self-consistent. Well, I mean, everything has to be self-consistent, but immediately self-contained thing for one person, more or less, to be able to come up with it. QFT has way too many small pieces scattered everywhere for one person to really come up with it. And that's kind of the direction that GR may be the last. Well, I don't want to say that actually for a different reason, but it's the last subject that we know about that was so much of a solid single cohesive unit for it to have been realistic for even the most brilliant of single people to come up with. So you probably would have had to change some, but I do think that these problems with the institutions have contributed a lot to us not having whatever our modern day version of what an Einstein would have been.
Yeah. So I guess what's our time looking like, Juan?
It's this plus 15.
Okay. So yeah, we should start wrapping it up. I guess I wanted to kind of wind down here, Sam, with some final questions for you, man. So
Okay.
we didn't get to really go too deep into your physics actual like condensed matter background. So I guess I wanted to just say like, or just ask you, so you seem more like a guy who's interested in like theories of everything. These really huge questions of, I mean, I guess every physicist is, right? So then my next question is like, I see you doing videos with like experimental stuff. So I see you messing around like you're talking with the periodic table with rubidium and lanthanum and stuff. And, you're kind of on this condensed matter train. Why condensed matter? Why not go into the theories of everything camp with the particle physicists and all that? Why condensed matter specifically?
So, first of all, every science interests me. And that's one of the problems with being able to teach yourself and understand this stuff pretty quickly. You don't have the benefit of picking based on what makes the most sense to you because you can pretty much learn whatever. And then you also have better perspective on all the subjects. So the reason why each one definitely is interesting is apparent to you. So then you just end up interested in everything. It's like, well, what do you do? And I actually did even do a chemistry degree, partly as a backup, along with my physics degree. And you're right, it was only that I even completely focused in on physics when I got to grad school. And the reason why I then picked condensed matter, it wasn't really because of that. It was more facilitated by the fact that I can be interested in anything. The actual motivation was because all the high energy particle theory options basically suck. I mean, there's no funding. So I would have to TA every semester, probably even the summers, just to get through it. And that's just a huge extra burden. I could TA less than half that much as a theory, condensed matter theory. It seems like condensed matter theory has a larger spectrum of job opportunities, and it still allows me to get into quantum field theory. And I'm particularly interested in, and I've done a little bit of the quantum field theory involved with condensed matter, particularly how partition functions turn into field functional path integrals. And that's really fun. But I'm also particularly interested in seeing how, I mean, we don't really understand superconductivity properly. And it'd be interesting to see how an accurate, more complete understanding of superconductivity shows up in the field theory formulations. And it also does occur to me, it's a long shot, but if we could get superconductors that were not just high temperature, but really high current, or maybe a high temperature one would become a really abnormally high current one if you also had it cooled, something like that, then how much could you improve particle accelerators and then get to your theory of everything?
That's
that kind
cool.
of a thing.
I never thought of that.
So in an ideal world, I would pick high energy particle. It's a very practical decision that leverages the fact that I'm able to be interested in anything. More than an actual interest decision. And it's still early. I don't know. Maybe I'll end up in high energy, but that's why.
Very interesting. Yeah, it sounds very reminiscent of our choice as well.
Yeah.
And pretty cool field, honestly. And I mean, condensed matter is just so much you can do.
They have so many problems that I think would pave the way for other physics fields to make headway. We're talking about quantum. I mean, condensed matter experimentalists, a lot of them are flocking to quantum information, quantum computation. I mean, if you help with that and you help that field kind of come to fruition, I mean, the trickle effects or the catalysts of that would just be bountiful for science. I mean, just in general. But I mean, there's so many interesting things about condensed matter. I mean, yeah, like you're saying, there are QFT concepts. I mean, a lot of the stuff now are exploring symmetries in sort of these condensed matter systems, right?
Fractional quantum Hall effect.
Right,
It's
we're
pretty
talking
interesting.
about how something can be sort of like the electrons can be topologically protected. You know, there's a lot of symmetry concepts and high abstract mathematical stuff that comes in, and we're all trying to understand the interplay of these higher fields that are coming into condensed matter. So we're glad to have you on board in the well, as Murray Gell-Mann would say, condemned matter physicist. Yeah, Gell-Mann.
Yeah. But yeah, I guess, Juan, did you want to have any final closing things for Sam?
I mean, there's
here?
so much to talk about. I mean, but
Yeah.
I mean, it was great having you on.
Yeah, man, we really appreciate it. I mean, you had a lot of great stuff to say. And Sam, did you maybe have anything you wanted to close, share with the audience? Maybe a kind of a I don't know, a wise thought or something to leave the audience with?
I guess only two things that I can think of. One thing that I have, I forgot one of them just now. Shoot.
Maybe the other
It's hard when you're on the spot, right?
Yeah, the other one will jog
Oh
your
yeah,
memory.
oh yeah. If you're trying to get through a degree program, a lot of people walk into it thinking you got to try hard, but anyone can try hard. That's not the trick. The trick is trying long. Whatever you do, find a hardness you can manage, even if it's not the hardest you see around you. A lot of the people trying harder than you are making the mistake and will burn out. And even if there are people who can try long at a higher level than you, it will just not help you to try to exceed what you can do. So if you can try an amount hard that works, that's sustainable, do that. The challenge is trying long. You start to get ahead when you're there longer than other people, when you've been doing it longer, when you've been trying longer. And that was also the case with self-teaching. It's just like focus on trying long rather than trying hard, and you'll be surprised at how much your progress will add up. So that's the first thing that I would say. Another thing, a lot of people have this weird idea about productivity, that things that contribute directly to positive outcomes are the only things that are productive, and that things you just enjoy and that kind of relieve your stress, whatever, are not productive and are often filled with some kind of shame when you're under pressure to be productive. But I've found that you really got to value those things. If you can find something that's at all reasonable to do that improves your happiness significantly, it'll help you get through your whatever program or your self-teaching. For example, I grow exotic plants in my apartment, and that seems like a really non-productive way to spend time and money, but it does a lot to benefit my psychology, and I'm clear enough in how this stuff works to realize that that's valuable. So don't necessarily assume don't assume such a narrow view of productivity is another thing that I would recommend.
Yeah,
That's about all I got.
Man, those are great tips.
Yeah, those are great tips. Look, I had a shrimp farm. That was I used to do seascaping. And
For real?
And I had shrimp, little
That's so cool.
miniature colored shrimp, and there would be an ecosystem, and yeah.
That's what's up.
Yeah, it was very zen. I called it an aqua zen garden, as some people would say. But yeah, I mean, I 100% agree with you, Sam. These endeavors are worthy of just by the endeavor alone. It should be enough. But yeah.
Well, excellent. And I guess that's a wrap for the podcast.
Yeah.
So, guys, make sure you like, share, comment, subscribe to the channel. Mm-hmm. Check out Eigenbros.com, Eigenbros on Instagram, Eigenbros on Twitter, Eigenbros2 on TikTok. Patreon members, thank you guys once again.
Thank you.
Check us out at patreon.com/Eigenbros if you want more cool interviews like this. And, of course, guys, check out Dietterich Labs. Mm-hmm. So if you haven't seen Sam's YouTube channel, I don't know, Sam, are you posting anymore yet? Or are you gonna?
Because of grad school, my schedule has not allowed that. And also, I probably will, when I next have time, I'll probably post slower just because, I mean, I don't want to burn myself out with that. I'll probably always post something every now and then just because I'll get a calculation done that I think is really cool, and I definitely want people to know how to do it. And certainly, when my situation changes enough for me to be able to do different kinds of science content, I feel like I'll definitely get into it, especially if any of what I'm doing is like more broadly appealing. So I think YouTube is in my future, but it'll probably be a bit light for now.
That's good.
Awesome.
And
So, guys, yeah.
Focus on the quality.
Right, right. So make sure you subscribe to Dietterich Labs.
Yeah.
You know, hit that bell so you guys can make sure you get all the high quality content.
Yeah.
And
we'll talk
Sam,
to you later.
thank you again, man. And audience, ta-ta.
See you later, audience.